I never thought my life would take such a drastic turn in such a short time. My name is Rachel, and this is the story of how my world turned upside down in a matter of days. It all began when my husband, Stephen, suggested we spend a few days at his Uncle Jack's farm. Our marriage had grown cold over the years, and I suppose Stephen thought a change of scenery would do us good. I remember the day we arrived at the farm as if it were yesterday. The fresh country air, the scent of freshly cut grass, and the sound of animals in the distance created an atmosphere of peace that contrasted with the storm brewing inside me. Jack greeted us at the entrance of the main house, a rustic but cozy building that seemed straight out of a fairy tale. From the moment I saw Jack, something stirred within me. He was older than Stephen, perhaps by 10 years, but hard work on the farm had kept him in excellent shape. His eyes, a deep blue, seemed to hide secrets I longed to discover. His deep voice and slow way of speaking captivated me immediately. The first few days passed without incident. Stephen and I helped with farm chores, and in the evenings, we all dined together on the terrace, enjoying the cool breeze and the stars. However, I couldn't help but notice the furtive glances Jack threw my way when he thought no one was looking. At first, I tried to ignore them, convincing myself it was just my imagination. But as the days went by, the tension between Jack and me became increasingly palpable. Small, accidental brushes when passing through a narrow hallway, double entendre comments during conversations, complicit smiles. It all added up to an attraction that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. One afternoon, while Stephen had gone to town for supplies, I found myself alone with Jack in the barn. I was feeding the horses when he entered, his presence filling the space in a way that made me hold my breath. "Rachel," he said my name as if it were a caress. "Do you need help?" I turned to look at him, and at that moment, time seemed to stand still. The evening light filtering through the barn slats bathed his face, highlighting his strong, masculine features. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "No, I'm fine," I managed to stammer, aware of how close he was. Jack took a step towards me, and I instinctively backed up until my back touched the barn wall. I could feel the heat of his body, smell his scent of earth and sweat, an intoxicating mixture that clouded my senses. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice a husky whisper that sent shivers down my spine. I don't know who made the first move, but suddenly his lips were on mine in a passionate and desperate kiss. My hands tangled in his hair while his roamed my back, pulling me closer to him. It was as if all the tension built up over days exploded in that moment. As quickly as it started, it ended. We separated, panting and confused. The reality of what had just happened fell on me like a bucket of cold water. I had kissed my husband's uncle. I had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. This can't happen again," I said, trying to catch my breath and regain my composure. Jack nodded, but his eyes said otherwise. We both knew this was only the beginning. The following days were torture. Every time Stephen left us alone, the tension between Jack and me was unbearable. We tried to act normal, but the looks laden with desire and the accidental brushes multiplied. I felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. One night after dinner, Stephen announced that he would have to return to the city for a few days due to an urgent problem at work. My heart raced at the prospect of being alone with Jack, a mixture of fear and excitement coursing through my body. The night Stephen left, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, remembering the kiss in the barn, imagining what would happen if I dared to go to Jack's room. Near midnight, I couldn't stand it anymore. I got up and, with my heart racing, headed to his room. I was about to knock when the door opened. Jack was there, as if he had known I would come. Without a word, he took me in his arms and kissed me with a passion that left me breathless. That night, I gave myself to him completely, forgetting for a few hours that I was married, that he was my husband's uncle, that what we were doing was wrong. Only we two existed and the fire that consumed us. The next morning, I woke up with a mixture of guilt and satisfaction. I knew I had crossed a point of no return, but I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Jack made me feel alive in a way I hadn't experienced in years. The following days were a whirlwind of passion and secrets. We took advantage of every moment alone to be together, exploring our bodies and our feelings. It was as if we had created a parallel world where only we two existed. However, the bubble was destined to burst. One afternoon, while we were in the kitchen, Jack was passionately kissing me against the counter. We were so absorbed in each other that we didn't hear the sound of a car approaching. Suddenly, the kitchen door opened. Stephen was there, his eyes wide open, an expression of disbelief and pain on his face. Time seemed to stop as the three of us looked at each other, frozen in the moment. "What? What's going on here?" Stephen's voice sounded distant, as if coming from another world. Jack and I separated abruptly, but it was too late. There was no way to explain or justify what Stephen had just seen. "Stephen, I began to say, but the words got stuck in my throat. What could I say? How could I explain that I had fallen in love with my husband's uncle? Stephen's face went from disbelief to fury in a matter of seconds. He lunged at Jack, hitting him with all the strength he could muster. I screamed, trying to separate them as they rolled on the kitchen floor, exchanging blows and shouts. Finally, I managed to interpose myself between them. Stephen stood up, panting, with a thread of blood running from his split lip. His eyes, full of pain and betrayal, fixed on me. "Why Rachel? Why him?" His voice was barely a broken whisper. I had no answer, at least not one that could ease his pain. "I'm sorry," was all I could say, tears running down my cheeks. Stephen shook his head as if he couldn't believe what was happening. Without saying another word, he turned around and left the house. I heard the roar of his car driving away, taking with it the remains of our marriage. I stood there in the middle of the kitchen between Jack and the mess we had caused. The silence was deafening, broken only by our agitated breathing. "What now?" Jack finally asked, his voice laden with guilt and concern. I had no answer. My life as I knew it had crumbled in a matter of minutes. The future I once imagined with Stephen had vanished, replaced by an uncertain path full of guilt and consequences. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. Stephen didn't return to the farm, and his missed calls piled up on my phone. I didn't have the courage to talk to him, to face the reality of what I had done. Jack and I moved around the house like ghosts, trapped between guilt and the desire that still burned between us. A week after the incident, I received a message from Stephen. He wanted us to meet at a cafe in town to talk. My heart raced at the prospect of seeing him, of facing the consequences of my actions. The day of the meeting, I sat in the cafe with trembling hands around a cup of coffee I couldn't drink. When Stephen entered, I felt as if I had been punched in the stomach. He looked haggard, with deep dark circles and an expression of defeat I had never seen in him before. He sat across from me, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The silence was loaded with all the unspoken words, all the "I'm sorry" and "why" that floated between us. "I've been thinking a lot," Stephen began, his voice hoarse and tired. "About us, about what happened, about the future." I nodded, unable to form words. "What you did, what you both did, it destroyed me, Rachel," he continued. "I trusted you, trusted him. You were the two people I trusted most in the world." Tears began to run down my cheeks. I wanted to say something, anything, but what words could fix what I had broken? "But I've also thought about our marriage," Stephen said, surprising me. "About how we had grown apart, how we let routine and work extinguish what we had." I looked at him, confused. Where was he going with this? "I'm not justifying what you did," he quickly clarified. "But I understand that we both share some blame in how we got to this point." He took a deep breath before continuing. "Rachel, I love you. Despite everything, despite the pain. I love you, and I'm willing to try to save our marriage, if you are too." His words hit me like a wave. Was he willing to forgive me? To try again? Guilt, relief, and confusion mixed inside me. "But I need to know," he continued, his voice broken with emotion. "Do you love him? Do you love Jack?" The question hung in the air between us. Did I love Jack? What I felt for him was intense, passionate, but was it love? Or just an explosion of desire and emotion after years of monotony? I don't know, I answered honestly. What I feel for Jack is intense, but with you, I have a history, a life. I don't know if I'm ready to throw all that away. Stephen nodded slowly, processing my words. I understand, but I need you to make a decision, Rachel. We can't go on like this, in this limbo. Either we try to rebuild what we have, or we separate and you follow your path with Jack, if that's what you really want. The decision weighed on me like a slab. On one hand, there was my marriage, years of shared history with Stephen, the life we had built together. On the other, there was the passion and excitement I had discovered with Jack, the feeling of being alive again. I need time, I finally said. I need to think, to clarify my feelings. Stephen nodded, a mixture of understanding and pain in his eyes. Take the time you need, but don't make me wait forever. With those words, he got up and left the cafe, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my guilt. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and reflections. I stayed at a small hotel in town, needing to be away from both Stephen and Jack to think clearly. I spent hours walking through the fields, remembering the happy moments with Stephen, the life we had built together. But I also thought about Jack, about how he had made me feel alive again, about the passion he had awakened in me. One afternoon, as I watched the sunset from a hill, I had an epiphany. I realized that what I felt for Jack, though intense, was more an explosion of repressed desire than true love. I had confused the excitement of the forbidden, the adrenaline of the adventure, with a deeper feeling. With Stephen, despite the problems and monotony we had let grow between us, there was a deeper bond, a shared history, common dreams, an understanding that went beyond momentary passion. That night, I made a decision. I called Stephen and asked him to meet me again. We met at the same cafe, the tension palpable between us. "I've been thinking a lot," I began, my voice trembling but determined. "About us, about Jack, about everything that's happened." Stephen looked at me expectantly, his eyes a mixture of hope and fear. "What happened with Jack?" "It was a mistake," I continued. "A mistake born of loneliness, of lack of communication between us. It's not an excuse, I know, but it's the truth." I took a deep breath before continuing. "I love you, Stephen. Despite everything, despite my mistakes, I love you. And if you're willing, I want to try to rebuild what we have." I saw Stephen's eyes fill with tears. He reached out across the table and took my hand. "It won't be easy," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "There's a lot to heal, a lot of trust to rebuild." "I know," I replied, squeezing his hand. "But I'm willing to do whatever it takes, couples therapy, time, whatever it takes." Stephen nodded slowly. "I'm willing too. I love you, Rachel, and I want this to work." That night, we went home together. The path to reconciliation wouldn't be easy, we knew that, but we were willing to try. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. We had to face Jack, explain our decision. It was a painful conversation, full of tears and apologies. Jack, although hurt, understood. He decided to move away for a while, to give us the space we needed to heal. Stephen and I started couples therapy. It was a difficult process, unraveling years of unresolved problems, of lack of communication. There were moments when I thought we wouldn't make it, that the damage was too great, but little by little, we rebuilt our relationship. We learned to communicate better, to express our needs and fears. We rediscovered the love that had united us in the first place. It wasn't an easy road. There were nights of heated arguments, of doubts and fears, moments when the temptation to give up was strong. But every time I looked at Stephen, I saw the effort he was making, the love that still shone in his eyes despite the pain I had caused him, and I found the strength to keep going. A year after that fateful day on the farm, Stephen and I renewed our marriage vows. It was a small, intimate ceremony, just the two of us and a handful of close friends. As we exchanged rings and promises, I felt we were starting anew, stronger and wiser than before. That night, as we danced under the stars, Stephen whispered in my ear, "Thank you for fighting for us." I looked into his eyes, seeing in them all the love and strength we had found together. "Thank you for not giving up on me," I replied. I knew our journey wasn't over, that there would still be challenges ahead. But I also knew that, together, we could face anything. As the soft music enveloped us and night fell around us, I thought about everything we had been through, about how a moment of weakness had almost destroyed everything we had built. But I also thought about how that same moment had forced us to face our problems, to grow and strengthen our love. Life isn't always easy, and love can be complicated. But I learned that, with effort, commitment, and a good dose of forgiveness, even the biggest mistakes can become opportunities to grow and love more deeply. Months after our vow renewal, Stephen and I decided it was time for a new beginning. We sold our house in the city and bought a small farm, similar to Jack's, but far enough away to not awaken old memories. The move was a cathartic process. As we packed our belongings, it seemed we were also packing our past, preparing to write a new chapter in our lives. Our new home was small but cozy, surrounded by green fields and a small orchard. We decided to raise some chickens and grow our own vegetables. It was a radical change from our life in the city, but it felt right, as if we were returning to our roots, reconnecting with the earth and with ourselves. The first weeks were challenging. Neither of us knew much about farming or animal husbandry. There were frustrating moments, like when our first garden attempt was devoured by rabbits, or when one of the chickens escaped and we spent hours chasing it through the field. But those challenges, instead of separating us, brought us even closer together. We laughed at our mistakes, celebrated our small triumphs. Every tomato we managed to harvest, every egg we collected, was a shared victory. One night, as we dined on the porch, enjoying a salad made with vegetables from our own garden, Stephen looked at me with a smile. "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but I think that crisis was the best thing that could have happened to us," he said. I looked at him surprised. "Are you serious?" He nodded. "It forced us to face our problems, to really communicate. And look at us now. We're closer than ever." I reflected on his words. He was right. Although the path had been painful, it had led us to a better place. We had learned to appreciate what we had, to not take our love for granted. "You're right," I said, taking his hand. "But promise me we won't have to go through something like that again to keep growing." Stephen laughed, squeezing my hand. "I promise. From now on, only positive growth." As the months passed, our life on the farm settled into a comfortable routine. We spent mornings working in the garden or tending to the animals. In the afternoons, Stephen focused on his remote work while I wrote. I had started working on a novel inspired by our experiences. Our evenings were peaceful, filled with deep conversations, laughter, and renewed love. We had rediscovered the pleasure of simply being together, enjoying each other's company without the need for external distractions. One day, as we returned from a walk in the nearby woods, Stephen suddenly stopped. "Rachel," he said, his voice serious, "there's something I've been thinking about." My heart skipped a beat. Despite how far we had come, a part of me still feared that everything could crumble at any moment. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep calm. Stephen took my hands in his. "I've been thinking, how would you feel about trying for a baby?" The surprise left me speechless for a moment. Having children was something we had vaguely discussed in the past, but we had never felt it was the right time. "Are you sure?" I finally asked. "It's a big step." He nodded, a smile lighting up his face. "I've never been more sure of anything. I think we're ready. Our love is stronger than ever. We have a stable home. What better time than now?" I felt tears filling my eyes. The idea of creating a life together, of starting a family, filled me with a joy I couldn't describe. "Yes," I said, my voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, let's do it." That night, as we made love, it was different. There was a new tenderness, a new hope in every caress. It was no longer just for pleasure or connection, but with the possibility of creating life. The following months were an emotional roller coaster. Each month we waited with anticipation, only to feel disappointed when the pregnancy test came back negative. But we didn't give up. We knew good things take time. Finally, on a spring morning, I saw the 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test. My heart stopped for a moment before it started beating frantically. When I gave Stephen the news, he cried with joy. He hugged me so tightly I thought I would run out of air, but I didn't care. We were ecstatic, terrified and excited all at once. The pregnancy was a wonderful and challenging experience. My body changed, day by day, and with it our lives. Stephen was by my side every step of the way, from nighttime cravings to doctor's visits. We decided not to know the baby's sex. We wanted it to be a surprise. We spent hours discussing names, imagining what our son or daughter would be like. One afternoon, while decorating the baby's room, Stephen paused in the middle of painting a wall. "You know," he said, a thoughtful expression on his face, "I never thought we'd get here." I looked at him, feeling a pang of guilt. I knew what he meant. There was a time when we thought all was lost. Neither did I admitted, but I'm so grateful that we did. Stephen put down the roller and came over to me, placing a hand on my swollen belly. "Me too, and I promise I'll never take what we have for granted again." I felt the baby move inside me, as if agreeing. It was a constant reminder of the love we had built, of the future that awaited us. The day our daughter was born was the happiest of our lives. We named her Hope, because that's what she represented for us. Hope for the future, in our love, in our ability to overcome any obstacle. As I held her in my arms for the first time, with Stephen by my side, I felt that everything in my life had led to this moment. All the mistakes, all the struggles had brought us here. I looked at Stephen, seeing in his eyes the same love and wonder I felt. "I love you," I whispered. "And I love you," he replied, kissing my forehead before caressing our daughter's cheek. At that moment, I knew we had found our happy ending. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real and beautiful. Our story didn't end with, "and they lived happily ever after." Real life doesn't work that way. There were sleepless nights, arguments about diapers and feeding schedules, moments of doubt and exhaustion. But we faced every challenge together, every obstacle made us stronger, and every day seeing our daughter grow reminded us why it was worth fighting for our love. Years later, as we celebrated Hope's 5th birthday, I found myself reflecting on our journey. It had been a long and sometimes difficult road, but every step had led us to where we were now. I looked at Stephen, who was helping Hope blow out her birthday candles. His hair had some grey now, and there were wrinkles around his eyes when he smiled. But to me, he had never been more beautiful. When our eyes met over our daughter's head, I saw in his eyes the same love that had been there from the beginning. A love that had survived the storm, that had been strengthened in adversity. And I knew with a certainty that filled me with peace, that no matter what the future held for us, as long as we had each other, as long as we remembered to value what we had, we could face anything. That night, after putting Hope to bed, Stephen and I sat on the porch as we had done so many times before. The night was warm, the sky was full of stars. "What are you thinking about?" Stephen asked, noticing my silence. "About us," I replied honestly. "About everything we've been through, about how lucky we are." Stephen took my hand, intertwining our fingers. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" I nodded, resting my head on his shoulder. "Yes, we have, and I'm grateful for every step." We stayed like that for a long time, in comfortable silence, enjoying each other's presence. And as I looked to the future, I felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. Our story hadn't been easy. We had made mistakes, We had hurt each other, but we had also learned to forgive, to grow, and to love more deeply. As the years passed, our life on the farm became a haven of peace and happiness. Hope grew up surrounded by nature, learning the value of hard work and love for the land. Seeing her run through the fields, laughing as she chased butterflies or helped collect eggs from the chickens, filled our hearts with indescribable joy. However, life always has ways of testing our strength and our love. When Hope was 7 years old, we received a call that shook our world. Jack, Stephen's uncle, was seriously ill. The doctors had diagnosed him with terminal cancer, and he had only a few months to live. The news hit us hard. Despite everything that had happened, Jack was still family. Stephen and I had to face a difficult decision. Should we go see him? It was a tense conversation, full of mixed emotions. On one hand, we felt the moral obligation to be there for him in his last moments. On the other, we feared that his presence might awaken old ghosts, reopen wounds that we had worked so hard to heal. Finally, after many nights of discussion and reflection, we decided that the right thing to do was to go. We couldn't let the past dictate our actions in the present. We had grown, we had forgiven, and it was time to prove it. The trip back to Jack's old farm was surreal. As we drove down familiar roads, memories of those turbulent days came back to me, but this time, instead of shame or guilt, I felt a strange peace. We had weathered that storm and were stronger for it. Jack was unrecognizable when we saw him. The disease had consumed his body, leaving him frail and emaciated. But his eyes, those blue eyes that had once captivated me, still shone with life. When he saw us enter his room, a mix of emotions crossed his face: surprise, joy, and finally deep sadness. "You came," he said in a weak voice. "I didn't think you would." Stephen approached the bed, taking his uncle's hand. "Of course we came. Your family." I saw tears form in Jack's eyes. "After everything I did, I'm so sorry." I felt a lump in my throat. Seeing this man, who had once been so strong and vital, reduced to this, moved me deeply. "It's okay," I said, approaching as well. "All that is in the past. We're here now." Jack looked at both of us, a small smile forming on his cracked lips. "You two, are you okay?" Stephen and I exchanged a look, and at that moment, any doubts I might have had about our decision to come vanished. "We're more than okay," Stephen replied, squeezing my hand. "We're happy." We spent the following weeks with Jack, helping where we could, sharing stories and memories. Hope, who knew nothing of our past history, quickly became fond of her great uncle, filling his last days with laughter and childish joy. Seeing Stephen and Jack rebuild their relationship was a moving experience. They talked about old times, about mistakes made, about forgiveness and second chances. And although the past would always be there, it no longer had power over us. The night before Jack passed away, he asked to speak to me alone. Stephen, understanding, left the room, leaving us alone. "Rachel," Jack said, his voice barely a whisper, "I need you to know what happened between us. It was real for me, but it was also a mistake, a beautiful mistake that should never have happened." I felt tears running down my cheeks. "I know, Jack, it was real for me too. But Stephen is the man for you," he interrupted with a weak smile. "He always was. I'm glad you found your way back to each other." I took his hand, feeling how fragile it had become. "Thank you, Jack, for understanding, for forgiving us, for everything." He nodded, closing his eyes. "Be happy, Rachel. Love Stephen and that beautiful girl with all your heart. Life is too short to waste on regrets." Jack passed away that night, surrounded by family and at peace with himself. His funeral was a celebration of his life, full of shared stories and memories. And although there was sadness, there was also a sense of closure, that a chapter in our lives had finally been completed. After the funeral, Stephen and I stayed at the old farm for a while, helping to put Jack's affairs in order. It was a period of reflection for both of us, an opportunity to face the last vestiges of our past and let them go definitively. One afternoon, while sorting through old photographs in the attic, Stephen found an image that left us breathless. It was a photo of the three of us taken years ago, before everything got complicated. We were smiling, happy, with no idea of what the future held for us. "It's strange," Stephen said, looking at the photograph. "Sometimes I think about how things would have been if none of that had happened." I looked at him, feeling a mixture of nostalgia and gratitude. "I've thought about that too, but you know what? I think we had to go through all of that to get to where we are now." Stephen nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. "You're right. It made us stronger, more united. It taught us not to take our love for granted." I took his hand, intertwining our fingers. "Exactly. And although I wouldn't change what we have now for anything in the world, I think it's important to remember. It helps us appreciate what we've built." That night, after putting Hope to bed, Stephen and I sat on the porch of the old farm, looking at the stars. The air was filled with the scent of wildflowers and the distant sound of crickets, you know? Stephen said after a long silence. "I was thinking maybe we should keep this farm." I looked at him surprised. "Are you serious? What about our house?" He shrugged. "We could sell it or keep it as a vacation home, but I think there's something special here, a place where we faced our greatest challenges and came out stronger. Plus, Hope loves it." I thought about his proposal, the idea of living here, in the place where our story had taken such a dramatic turn, might have been terrifying in the past. But now, it felt like an opportunity to completely transform that chapter of our lives. "I like the idea," I finally said. "It would be like reclaiming this place, filling it with new, happy memories." Stephen smiled, pulling me closer to him. "Exactly, a new beginning, in the place where we once thought everything had ended." The following months were a whirlwind of activity. We sold our previous house and moved permanently to Jack's farm. It was an emotional process, full of logistical challenges and moments of doubt, but with each passing day, we felt we were making the right decision. We renovated the house, maintaining its rustic charm but modernizing it for our needs. The barn became a studio where I could write, and we expanded the old orchard to include a variety of fruits and vegetables. Hope flourished in this new environment. She spent hours exploring the fields, learning about nature, and developing a deep love for country life. Seeing her grow here, free and happy, was a constant source of joy for us. One summer afternoon, while Stephen and I were working in the garden, Hope came running, her eyes bright with excitement. "Mom, Dad," she shouted, "I found something in the old barn." She looked at us expectantly, almost jumping with enthusiasm. Stephen and I exchanged an amused look before following her. In the old barn, behind a pile of hay, Hope showed us her discovery, an old wooden box covered in dust and cobwebs. Carefully, Stephen opened it. Inside, we found a treasure trove of memories, old photographs, letters yellowed by time, and a diary. My heart skipped a beat when I recognized the handwriting in the diary. It was Jack's. That night, after Hope went to bed, Stephen and I sat down to read the diary together. It was an emotional experience, seeing the events of the past through Jack's eyes. His loneliness, his internal struggle, his regret. It was all there, written with heartbreaking honesty. But what impacted us the most were the last entries. Jack wrote about us, about how he had seen us grow and overcome our problems. He wrote about his joy at seeing that we had found our way back to each other, and his hope that someday we could fully forgive him. When we finished reading, we both had tears in our eyes. Stephen looked at me, a mix of emotions on his face. "I think I finally understand," he said softly. "All this time, I thought Jack had just acted out of selfishness. But he was so lonely, so lost." I nodded, feeling a wave of compassion for the man who had once threatened to destroy our marriage. "We all make mistakes," I said. "The important thing is that in the end, we were all able to forgive and move on." Stephen took my hand, squeezing it gently. You know, I think finding this, it's like the universe is telling us we made the right decision by coming here, to start over in this place. I smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. I think you're right. It's like we've come full circle. That night, as we lay in bed, I reflected on our journey. We had been through so much: betrayal, pain, forgiveness, renewal. And here we were, stronger and more united than ever. I turned to look at Stephen, who was already asleep. His face was relaxed, peaceful. I gently traced the line of his jaw with my finger, feeling a wave of love so intense it almost took my breath away. At that moment, I knew with certainty that I wouldn't change anything about our past. Every tear, every moment of doubt, every struggle had led us to this point. It had taught us the value of true love, of forgiveness, of perseverance. Our story wasn't perfect. It was full of mistakes and moments of weakness. But it was our story, and every chapter had led us to this moment of happiness and peace. As I fell asleep, with the sound of Stephen's breathing and the soft murmur of the wind in the trees outside our window, I felt a deep gratitude for our love, for our family, for second chances. And I knew, with a certainty that filled me with peace, that no matter what the future held for us, we had weathered the worst storm and had come out stronger. Together we could face anything.